Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
And I'm Steven Park. And we're here today for our TV review of Pachinko.
Yes.
The book originally written by Min Jin Lee.
Mm-hmm.
The TV version seen on AppleTV Plus.
Yes. And in our last episode, we just finished reading Pachinko, and we pretty much binge watched this.
Yeah, I think we got through it in a week or so.
Yes. There are 8 episodes in total, so essentially, for the most part, we watched one a day, and then one of them we watched 2 episodes in one.
Mm-hmm. And they're about an hour long, so it's not a quick watch.
No.
They're also fairly deep in content.
Well, it's the book it's based off is also very deep, also very intense.
Right. So not a super light, easy watch either.
No.
But what did you think overall of the interpretation that they did with the TV show?
I think that it was a very cinematic way of presenting the book's material, and I felt as though they, for the most part, most of the characters looked the way I thought they would, except for Yosep. And when I first saw Mazazu, I was like, oh, that's not really who I saw him as. But then when I saw his younger self, I'm like, that's him.
What was different about Yosep's look?
Yosep's look in the TV series looked very, not to stereotype, but his facial shape looks very kind. And I feel as though Yosep was such a hard person. Very traditional, very stuck in his ways kind of person. And in my mind, I thought of a person with a square and firm jaw, or a jawline.
For me, I don't know if it's because we're reading a book based around Korean people, but I think I had trouble picturing what everyone looked like. So when I saw the interpretation that they had on the TV show, a lot of them made sense, except I agree, Yosep was a little bit different, but once he got upset and angry, I was like, oh yeah, that's Yosep.
Well, yeah, the actor played him to the T.
Yeah, and the other character that I thought was a little bit not quite on character for me was Hansu.
By looks or by action?
By looks. So he, in my mind, was a little bit of a larger character, like more broad shoulders, commanding a bigger presence, whereas I felt like the guy that was represented was very handsome, but he commanded the presence more based off of his suits and his outfits rather than his body structure.
Body shape.
Yeah, so I think those were the biggest outliers for me. Solomon was also just kind of like, I guess that's what he looked like, because we never saw him as a kid, whereas for me, Solomon was always a child.
Right. We didn't see him as an adult.
Right. And so I think that kind of goes into one of the biggest conflicts for me, which was there was such a big change in storytelling from the book and the TV show.
The focus, I think, the focal point being on Solomon instead of on Sunja and her story.
Well, I think Sunja's story was actually well represented, and
True.
I think they did dive into Sunja's story pretty well as an elder character.
Right.
But they didn't go into all of the hard work that she built up between her adult years, having Noah, having Mozazu, and having to work the kimchi and the candy shop and all that stuff.
Right. Definitely. So I feel like a lot of that representation was more of an inference and not a clear look of what her hardship was.
Yeah, and I agree, because for me, that was a big part of the book, was to understand the struggles of the people that came before us and how much that meant. Now, that isn't to say that they didn't include that within the story that they told. So I think because of the fact that they omitted some of Sunja's story, they brought in that character who was the land-owning grandmother, and they gave her a bigger role.
Right. We saw more about her story and how her life and Sunja's life, even though there are similarities, their struggles were different.
And I really liked the person that she was. I thought it provided a lot of clarity. It was the character that fought back against the development, against the newer times.
Right.
When Solomon was coming in and saying things like, oh, why don't you want to sell? Don't you want to give for your children? And her response was, I've already given a lot to my children. Like, I've already given a lot of myself to everyone else. Like, this is what I want to do for myself.
Right.
So I thought that was a big part that was fairly untold within the books.
Yeah.
I guess fairly untold, even just more obviously. It was definitely written within the layers of the story, but not outright.
Right. And going back to the central character, Solomon, I also think that my idea of who Solomon is, even the brief time that we had with him in the book, was different, like very different from the person in the TV series. Solomon in the TV series was very angsty, very agonized, also wanting to beat back against tradition while also trying to convince others, specifically the harmony that he's trying to sell to, about tradition.
He was a brat.
Yeah, absolutely, which is not what I had hoped he would be. And I also think there was too much focus on Hana's death.
I think there was too much focus on Hana's story. I thought she was also bratty. So one of the reasons why she left the house according to the TV show, well, the most major reason is because Sunja said something, which was along the lines of, that's why Solomon left, is because of what we may have done to him. Like, she was inferring that if Solomon had stayed, the presence of the household would have not been great for Solomon.
Right.
And what she meant was that she felt guilty about the way that she raised Noah. But what Hana took was that Hana was the person that was bad for Solomon, and so that's why Sunja was saying that Solomon should have left.
Yeah.
We got extreme clarity from Sunja saying that's not even what I meant.
Right.
I didn't even have you in my thoughts. But that led to the cascade of Hana's story and her going and, you know, kind of finding herself in shadier positions, finding herself in roles that put her in more danger, and then finally contracting AIDS and going through that story. I just thought that that story was such a small part of all of their lives.
Yeah.
And yet, if you watch the TV show, it feels like a quarter of the show is dedicated to Hana and Solomon's story.
Right, exactly. I felt that they became the central characters and took away from the heart of Pachinko, the book. In connection to that, I think that because the story focused so much on these young people's lives, it took away from the title itself, Pachinko. Pachinko became a backstory. There was no more Chekhov's gun. There was no more foreshadowing. There was no more illusions. It was just, oh, this is what Mazazu does.
And I think that was also told. That was also in the way that the story was told between the past and the present. So connecting back multiple times from this is what's happening in the current day to what's happening in the past.
Right.
Now, for me, I felt like if I had only watched the show, I think I would have been pretty lost overall of what was going on. I think without the backstory of the book, it would have been really hard to gain a sense of who is Sunja and this child to this old lady. They showed that flip of the switch, but without the backstory of what it actually meant, I think it would not have been the same story that I saw if it wasn't for the book that I had read.
Definitely. I think the TV show leaves Easter eggs for those who have read the book that would have like just flown over our heads and would have been like, oh, that was weird. Why did they add that in? I agree. I feel similar to what you just said, that without the book, without having that backstory in the back of our minds, I would have been very lost. I would have been thinking that Sunja didn't have as strong of a role, that Sunja is more of a back character who influenced people but didn't have like an actual pull to the story.
Yeah, because you never saw Sunja's real struggle.
Right.
The Sunja that we saw was the character that we saw grow up from childhood and move to Osaka, but we didn't see the Sunja that grew up from having to be independent
and
then going forth.
Yes.
Like, if there's a second season of Pachinko, I think that makes more sense as to why they presented it the way that they did. But they ended the show with the kimchi making.
Right.
Which, for me, was the start of Sunja becoming the character that she did.
Exactly. Would you watch another season of Pachinko?
I think I would watch it out of curiosity. Now, what you said in the beginning was that it was visually stunning, or I forget exactly what you said.
Yes, very stunning.
That's how I saw it too. It was so beautiful. Everything was so well done. The characters were so well developed.
Yeah.
But once again, I think that only comes into play because I know who these characters are.
Right.
It almost seemed more like an epilogue. Like, reading the book, this is the story, and the TV show is an epilogue to, well, this is Solomon's journey, and, this is Sunja being able to return home, which we didn't get to hear about in the book.
Right.
So if I view it that way, it made more sense, but
totally.
I did not really like the way they interpreted the story.
For sure. I feel as though if they renamed it, like Solomon, a Pachinko story, or something like that, I feel like it would have felt more fitting for it to be presented the way that it was presented.
I feel like we're just dogging on this show.
I know.
It actually, like, once again, there's a lot of absolutely stunning moments in this show.
Oh, yeah.
And I think if you've read the book, you will enjoy the interpretations that they made to a certain extent.
Right, and the little nuggets that they put into the details.
Right, because watching Sunja grow up was very beautiful. Like, it almost seemed like Game of Thrones last season.
Oh, yeah.
Where you had the first 4 episodes and it's like, wow, this is really cool. Like, I see where this is going.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden you get the midnight episode where you don't see anything.
And then it just cuts off from there.
Yeah, and it goes super fast at the end. So that's almost what it seemed like, is we got this very beautiful storytelling of Huni, and the connection between Huni and Sunja was a big part of the first third, if not half of the book, of Sunja constantly thinking back of Huni as a role model for who her husband should be.
Right, and how she should act with her children.
So I love that part of the show, but they also completely omitted Noah's character. I mean, we saw him as a child, but we didn't see him grow up. We didn't see him become the character that got lost in identity. We didn't see, sadly, the character that eventually felt so confused that he needed to take his own life, which was referenced to with Sunja talking about how she didn't feel like a great mother in certain instances. But if you only watch the TV show, you have no reason to understand why she didn't feel like a great mother.
And how angry Mozasu was when he said that Noah's gone.
Right.
We know in that sense that Noah has passed, but we don't know what led to his passing. We don't know where all of this was happening. We just know that he was here before and now he's gone. So another thing that I thought was interesting that was different from the book was how the TV series spent a whole episode on Hansu's backstory. I appreciated that it offered additional historical context, not only in focusing on why Hansu became who he was, but also the context of the earthquake amidst this time and how it rocked a lot of people's worlds. Yeah,
which we didn't get from the book.
Right.
It also outlined how Hansu became the character that he did. I don't think we got the perception of how much struggle his backstory had really given.
Right.
We saw in the TV show the complicated relationship between him and his father and his admittance into the Yakuza family. So I really did like that episode.
I didn't feel like it changed my perception of Hansu. I did feel bad for him. It did humanize him. I felt for him losing everything within the span of a day. But the person he was prior to that earthquake was the person I hoped he would still be after, but we know that he wasn't.
Right. Okay. So clearly we aren't the biggest fans of this current interpretation that we saw. If I were to tell you that these 8 episodes were made with having a second season in mind, would that change your mind of what we saw?
No. Even if there is a second season, I would still feel the same disappointment that I feel now. Regardless of whether or not I read the book, I would still feel disappointed and still feel like I don't feel complete knowing that there's a second season too.
So I did look it up, and it does look like they are prepped for a second season. It does change my mind a little bit.
Okay.
I'm wondering if the writers had created a timeline for 3 or 4 seasons, maybe. So one of our favorite shows is Ted Lasso.
Yes.
If you haven't seen it, it's amazing, it's fun, it's lighthearted, it kind of restores some faith in humanity. They do a great job in depicting different ethnicities and not just overlooking them, but really highlighting who they are.
Right, as people.
Right. So Ted Lasso, the show, was created for 3 seasons. The writers had, I think, based off of what I've heard, is they had created the show with all 3 seasons in mind and a certain number of episodes for those seasons.
I see.
If Pachinko is done similarly, because it's also an Apple TV Plus show, I think it could change my mind. I still don't like the interpretation of who Solomon was, because we do get that bit where, because his world starts crumbling from not making that sale, he goes to the other investor person and then pretty much tells him that we want to get the sale done no matter what happens. And then we see that scene with the grandmother being attacked in her own house.
Or about to be attacked. We don't know if she is or if it's just a threat.
Right. So for Solomon to go to those lengths makes him a different character for me, and a character that I don't like.
Exactly.
So yes, there are differences that I still am not fond of, but if the story is written out for a much longer length, I think I am more willing to give it a chance to create the full interpretation of what the directors or the filmmakers are willing to go with this story.
For sure. I'm hopeful that we'll get a fuller picture and truer picture to the book itself, but I don't know how true it'll be if Solomon's character is so different.
Right. I feel like if they're going on to season 2 is going to start focusing on Noah. Because we leave off with Noah and Hanzu and that introduction. So I think that's where that story's going next. And then maybe from there it's going to go into Mozazu's story. We also got that quick glimpse of Mozazu's friend Hiroki.
Yes.
And that whole family situation, which maybe the writers resolved. That was kind of up in the air.
Right.
Because in the book, we never really got a full resolution on what happened with that marriage.
Right. Between Haruki and Ayame.
Yeah. In the show, this other character is there who doesn't seem to be written quite like the book, where it's the younger brother who has mental disabilities.
Well, it seems like he left his family completely. Like, he left his wife, he left his brother. We don't know what his brother is like in the TV world.
Right.
Okay.
I'm just wondering if the writers decided to replace the brother with this other character. That's what I don't know, because they only displayed him for such a quick second.
For sure.
So I'm willing to give it a chance. I think the show overall is so beautifully done.
Yes.
And now realizing that there might be a second season or third season, or however they decide to play this out, it makes more sense to me of why they did the show the way that they did.
Totally.
But how about you? Would you recommend the show to other people?
I think I would say I do recommend it, with a caveat that things are left up in the air, that the characters are not the characters that are in the book for those who have read it already. So yes, I would recommend it, but just give them a heads up.
I'm going to cheat. I'm going to say, don't watch it yet. Let's wait another 3 years until everything's released.
For sure.
Then I'll watch those, and then I'll get back to you. I don't know how good this show's going to be. It feels very unfinished.
Right. And it seems like the two major things that we appreciate the most is the visual stunningness and the additional context of like history.
Mm-hmm. And the worlds that they created from the show are so well done.
Yes. One other thing that I would like to add that I appreciated so much about this TV series, despite all my other gripes, I appreciated that they added the women's stories at the very end. The women who truly went through these things and who are now stateless people, meaning that they're not Japanese citizens, but they were not taken back as citizens of Korea.
And they put real numbers and real experiences, which is what you're saying, to these events that are historically fictional.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. If you've watched the show and you have any opinions, or I don't know, if you had some concerns about the way they depicted some of the characters too, how can people get in contact with us?
You can email us at asianbookclubpod@gmail.com, or you can reach us through Instagram at asianbookclubpod.
We also have our website, which is asianbookclubpod.com, which has our bookshop, where you can see our current recommendations and other books that we've read or even plan to read.
Yeah.
Make sure to rate, review, like, and subscribe.
Yes.
Otherwise, be happy, be healthy, and read a book.
Ingat.
Bye.
Bye.